SARS-CoV-2 is worse than SARS-CoV because, paradoxically, it's not as bad. SARS tended to have a faster disease onset and be more severe, so you had far fewer infectious people with mild or no symptoms walking around spreading the disease. In fact, much of SARS spread was in hospitals, rather than on the street. That made it relatively simple to identify and isolate potential spreaders. SARS-CoV-2, on the other hand, has many people spreading it who are not sick and who don't isolate. Even so, SARS was just barely controlled. People are complacent today, but SARS came much closer to being a pandemic than most people realize.
Angiotensin-converting enzyme 2 (ACE2) is the receptor that both SARS-CoV and SARS-CoV-2 bind to. The S-spike glycoprotein that binds to ACE2 is slightly different in both viruses, and this results in different binding affinities. Recent studies have found that the modified S protein of SARS-CoV-2 has a significantly higher affinity for ACE2 and is 10 to 20-fold more likely to bind to ACE2 in human cells than the S protein of the previous SARS-CoV. This increase in affinity may enable easier person-to-person spread of the virus and thus contribute to a higher estimated R0 for SARS-CoV-2 than the previous SARS virus. Source:
The symptoms of SARS was much more severe compared to COVID and was much easier to spot and contain. Also, available information suggests that persons with SARS are most likely to be contagious only when they have symptoms, such as fever or cough. While SARS-CoV-2 COVID can spread while asymptomatic and X200b.
From what I understand, the biggest issue with SARS-CoV-2 is the fact that asymptomatic people can spread it, unlike SARS-CoV, which was only really contagious once the symptoms started to show. Same with Ebola. It's insanely deadly and contagious, but would only become contagious once the symptoms started to show.
They found patient 0, a doctor in China, and were able to shut down SARS following the network of contacts. Even though it was extensive, they were able to contain it. The first patient to test positive for COVID-19 in the U.S. came back from China with the symptoms and into Washington. They quickly were able to round up over 50% of his last contacts, but then an outbreak happened somewhere else, leading them to believe someone else entirely separate from his circle brought it back from China. The lapse of finding patient 0 and the probable inability to do so based on some asymptomatic patients made it hard to predict and follow the hot spot patterns. This virus plays stowaway better than SARS.
There are essentially 4 genes of interest within the family of coronaviruses. Spike, envelope, membrane, nucleocapsid (SEMN). Have fun making a mnemonic with that. The gene portion for the spike protein is highly variable, much like the variable region on an antibody. This allows the genes to sort of shuffle around and make different shapes and really on chemical level play around with binding affinities. It just so happens that COVID-19's genes have shuffled in just a way that give it a very high affinity for ACE2 within human cell membranes. This could be one reason. Secondly, the incubation for this disease is up to 14 days. That means someone can be walking around infecting others and have no idea. This makes it very hard to isolate. As an example, Ebola was pretty infectious, but only after someone starts showing symptoms. It did not do a good job of hiding itself to infect others. COVID-19 is very good at this. Also, and I don't know the science here, sorry, but COVID-19 isn't nearly as deadly as SARS. Therefore, it can keep people alive and keep infecting others. I'm sure you've heard, a good parasite does not kill its host. Viruses are kind of like little protein parasites. If they can infect you well enough to keep you alive, maybe you get a little sick, but not enough that you can't get around or spread to others. They've accomplished their mission. COVID-19 is dangerous, don't get me wrong, but to a specific faction of people, pre-existing conditions and the elderly. Of course, there are always outliers. Social distancing and good hygiene practices can help us keep those that are more susceptible to dying from this virus safe. Hope that helps. Sorry for any grammar or sloppiness. Type this out on mobile.
It's called SARS-CoV-2, not SARS-CoV-19. It is much more infectious, for one because it replicates in the mouth and not just in the lung, and secondly because it does not make people sick so quickly and even as infectious before people have first symptoms, so it infected much more people, which caused much more victims despite much lower mortality rate, probability of dying after being infected.
In many cases SARS became infectious only when the person became seriously ill, but because of its high mortality rate, people mostly died before it could spread. Also because it only became infectious when you became seriously ill, we were able to contain it quickly and isolating those people that did get sick so they wouldn't be able to spread the virus. With COVID-19, many people are asymptomatic, don't know they have the virus, and can easily spread it like wildfire. Thus why COVID-19 has spread to millions of people, and has spread to 6/7 continents, while SARS only infected less than 10,000 people.
When it comes to viruses, there are 3 stats important: A. How easy can it infect people? B. How long is an infected person infecting others? C. How lethal is the virus? SARS was a virus that was good in A and C, but it wasn't infecting anyone until symptoms showed. It was quite easy to quarantine those infected, blocking the spread before it left the country. COVID-19 on the other hand is a lot less lethal than SARS was, but any infected person can infect others up to 10 days before showing symptoms. Some people, reportedly, even go through the entire disease without showing symptoms. It's very hard to figure out who is infected and who isn't, so the spread is more difficult to control. It might also be important that coughing blood usually makes people seek out a doctor a lot faster than what most would identify as common cold symptoms.